Alright, hey guys, welcome back to Griffin Airgun Ammo. In this video we're going to be looking at twist rates and the effect of twist rate and stability and how that might affect your BC for long range performance. And in order to kind of illustrate this effect, I have chosen to use my Condor in 257, and that was originally in 25 caliber, and we're just going to kind of show what might be a little bit too big for a certain twist rate, and how that might affect your ammunition choice, because this rifle stock had the ability of shooting like 125 foot-pounds in 25 caliber, so it's capable of shooting really heavy projectiles, but is going all the way to that super heavy end necessarily the most beneficial thing for you for your specific application? For certain hunting applications it won't make a difference. Absolutely getting the most foot-pounds is going to translate to more penetration and all that kind of stuff. So for hunting, this won't necessarily be super effective unless you're going for really far shots on, if you're trying to take out like prairie dogs and groundhogs and stuff like that at 200, 300, 400 yards. Then you might want to be a little bit more concerned with optimal BC and optimal stability so that you get less effects by the wind and more predictable results downrange, because that's really what it's all about, is being able to predict where that bullet's going to go in the conditions that you're firing in. So we're not going to get super crazy in it. We're just going to talk about some of the results that I've seen in testing that I wanted to verify from some of the books I've been reading on this very topic, and it's pretty clear. The trends definitely show up. So the Condor comes stock with a 25 caliber and 25 caliber with the low through wall through barrel. This has a 1 in 17 and 7 twist, which is 1 revolution per every 17.7 inches the bullet travels down the barrel. And so that's actually suitable for 25 and even 22 caliber to some extent. You can't get real heavy in 22 caliber, but it does work. In 25 caliber, 17 and 7 actually is not a bad twist rate. You can stabilize up to a pretty decent sized slug. And so this video is going to be kind of picking up at the end of that stability. So we're starting at 50 grains and going all the way up to 70 so that we can illustrate what happens when you exceed kind of the recommended parameters of your ballistics calculator. If it's telling you certain numbers, there's some things you're going to want to pay attention to, and this is going to kind of clue you into that. You'll also be able to use this to kind of pick the right ammo before you start, as you're starting your shopping process, regardless of what ammo it is. This is going to be universal across all slugs in pretty much any platform. So this is just kind of a general parameter, and it can kind of help you hone in on what's going to give you the best long range performance. And if you're not trying to shoot crazy really far distances, then that kind of opens the door up to some other options that might be maybe a little bit more favorable to exactly what you're doing. So anyway, what we did is we started out with 25 and 257. Both of these slugs have pretty much the same geometries. They have the same maul pit, same hollow point dimensions, roughly the same boat tail dimensions. One of them is just a 257, so it's 7/1000ths of an inch bigger than the 250. So there will be some slight discrepancies in weights versus lengths. So what determines your gyroscopic stability is going to be the diameter of your bullet and the length of your bullet. Now this is going to be according to the Miller twist rule, which is what's commonly used in most ballistic apps and ballistics calculators. And the Miller twist rule is based around kind of modern low drag bullets that have boat tails and such. So for this demonstration, we're using boat tails. These aren't really ultra low drag designs as far as it's a 2S ogive and not a 6 or 7S ogive like a modern low drag bullet is. But it's close enough to kind of mimic the stability characteristics of the Miller twist rate so that we can show you how that functions. The Miller twist rule isn't exactly precise for flat bases, but it still applies. It just your numbers might be a little bit different as far as what optimal stability is. So it's generally recommended that you get a stability factor or an SF of 1.5 to maintain your optimal BC, meaning that you have enough stability that the bullet is pretty much always flying perfectly nose forward without too much pitch or yaw. There is enough gyroscopic stability to eliminate that in a relatively short amount of time to maximize your BC. And that's really what you want, because if your bullet isn't flying perfectly nose on, it's got maybe a slight yaw to it. Let's see, point the camera this way. So if your bullet's kind of planing this way, or maybe it's cocked left or right, that's going to induce more drag. Having the right stability factor will not eliminate that, but it greatly reduces the effect of that and gives you pretty much the best BC that you can get. Once you drop below a stability factor of 1.5, you get into marginal stability. So from 1.5 to 1, your bullet will still fly nose first to the target, but it might have a slight pitch or yaw to it and not have optimal flight characteristics. Now, this isn't going to be the same thing as corkscrewing or the precession mutation that we see in pellets. That can happen and does happen with slugs, but that's not really what we're looking at. You can see a perfectly straight track in a scope cam and think that, oh man, that thing's flying perfect. In reality, it might be flying, like a boat going through the water instead of flying perfectly nose on, in which case you're not getting the peak aerodynamic benefits of your bullet. So that's kind of stability in a nutshell. So now that we know that we want to have a gyroscopic stability factor of around 1.5, 1.4 to 1.5 is recommended. Some bullets greatly, will still get higher benefits beyond 1.5, and we'll have to do another video on the effects of maybe overstabilization, and I'll have another barrel coming for this rifle because this is my kind of preferred test rifle for doing this sort of thing, because it pretty much gives me as much power as I want to use in small calibers. So that's a lot of fun to play with, but that'll be another video and another topic. So to get back to this, we shot 5 different slugs in each caliber. We did it in 5 grain increments. We went from 50, 55, 60, 65, and 70 in 257 and 25 caliber. The variable that we're trying to test is the twist rates between these two barrels. So this has a 1 in 17 and 7 like we mentioned, and this one has a 1 in 14. This is a 25-20 profile. This is real similar to what TJ produces and pretty much anybody that makes barrels in 25-20. Pretty much the same thing. So that's what we used for testing. This is a 25-inch barrel versus a 24-inch barrel. And anyway, what we're going to be looking for is the trends in BC and when the BC changes, what's the stability factor and how that corresponds to the overall length of the slug. All right, so I'm going to put screenshots of my ballistic app of Strelok Pro up here, and that will I'll point out what to look at as we go by each one of these slugs so that you guys aren't just totally hearing me talk without being able to actually see the data and how its input looks in a calculator. So first up, we got the 250 50 grain RBT, or rebated boat tail, that measures 0.491, that produced a gyroscopic stability factor of 1.47, So we're in that kind of sweet spot at 1.47. We're real close to 1.5, so we should get a pretty good BC, and we did. BC came out to about 1.43, which is pretty good. So stepping up in weight, we went to a 55 grain next. That measured in at 0.526 and produced a stability factor of 1.35. The BC jumped up to 1.61 because we increased our sectional density, and this also might have been we increased our sectional density, and we're still in a relatively good spot in the marginal stability region. So then moving up, we went to the 60 grain that measured in at 0.561. That produced a stability factor of 1.23 and made a BC of 1.60. So even though we stepped up in weight a little bit, we didn't really see any increase in BC at that point. And we're starting to get towards the lower end of the stability zone. We're getting closer to 1. Once you get to 1 and below 1, if you're under 1, if you're at like a 0.92, you're starting to enter the realm of risking your slug actually tumbling like a football to the target, which is it's not going to be very useful to you. So this is kind of how to interpret some of this stuff as I'm going through it. So stepping up to the 65 grain, that measured in at 0.06 of an inch, 0.600, produced a stability factor of 1.10, and the BC actually dropped just a point at 1.59. So again, we're not seeing any increase in BC as we're adding weight. So contrary to your intuition, you'd think increasing your sectional density is guaranteed increasing your BC. Not so much if it's exceeding your barrel's ability to stabilize the bullet, and that gets proven even more at the 70 grain. The 70 grain came in at 0.634, produced a stability factor of 1.03, so that's right there at the, it's still flying nose on, but you don't know how nose on. Is it kind of weaving? It's hard to tell, and it's not something that might be visible in a scope cam, even on slow motion. And the BC again stayed the same at 1.60 or 0.160. So from a 60 grain, or actually from the 55 grain up to the 70 grain, there was no increase in BC in a 1 17/7 twist barrel. So that's pretty interesting to me. The fact that you can jump up that much weight and the BC stays relatively the same just because your rifle isn't capable, or your barrel in your rifle isn't capable of stabilizing a slug that heavy. And it wasn't designed to, honestly. So, but there's people trying to shoot them. And so I just want to explain, we get asked a lot about making some of this really heavy stuff. And I just want to explain, if you're trying to shoot 300 yards at prairie dogs, a 70 grain slug may not be beneficial. If you're trying to shoot a coyote at 50, that might be very beneficial, because a 1.6 BC or a 0.16 BC is nothing to scoff at, but it's not the potential of that slug. And we'll see that with the 257 barrel, the 1 in 14 twist. So we'll do the same thing at the 1 in 14. So the 257 slugs now, and we started out with a 50 grain that measured 0.483, produced a stability factor of a whopping 2.60, so almost double of what the 1 in 14 or the 1 in 17/7 barrel did, and that produced a BC of 1.39. So just like, I think we were 4 thousandths off on the 25 cal BC, and that could be due to a little bit of it's spinning pretty hot when it comes out of the barrel. At the 55 grain, measured 0.518, produced a stability factor of 2.36, and produced a BC of 1.143. Jumping up to the 60 grain, we had a 0.551 inch measurement, produced a stability factor of 2.18, and the BC went to 1.72. Going up to a 65 grain, we had a 0.583 length, stereoscopic stability factor of 2.0, and we had a BC of 1.88. Going up to the 70 grain, that came in at 0.618, produced a stability factor of 1.82, and produced a BC of 0.203. So a substantially higher BC with a 70 grain out of a 257 bullet, or out of a 257 barrel, compared to a 70 grain out of a 17.7 standard barrel in 25 caliber. Standard for air guns, I should say. This is actually the standard for 25 caliber, kind of smaller stuff anyway. So pretty interesting results. Basically, this is hopefully going to give you some indication of A, the value of having a good ballistics calculator, and 2, how you can use a ballistics calculator to put in the parameters of your ammunition and find out what that's going to do in your rifle. What kind of results are you going to get on paper? And you can see that these results are a little bit predictable. You start to see a trend emerge, right? So we could take this all the way up to, I mean, a 1 in 14 twist barrel will actually stabilize all the way up to a 90 grain bullet at, I believe, a stability factor of like 1.32 or something like that. I'd have to double check that. But it does do it. It's not necessarily optimal stability, but it will stabilize it. So this is just kind of food for thought based on what your application is, what you've got your rifle set up to do. This isn't necessarily going to apply to every single air gun out there. There's a lot of stuff that, you know, the air gun market really hasn't evolved to the point where you've got a plethora of choices of twist rates and power options. Excuse me. So, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on this and explain it a little bit to you guys to where some of it makes sense. You know what I mean? And you can kind of pick out what's going to be the best suited application, or if you're thinking about getting a new rifle that's going to be dedicated to slugs and it's going to be for those really long shots, you know, some food for thought, especially if you're going to get a custom gun build or you're one of these crazy guys that loves to build crazy stuff. You know, that's kind of some food for thought. Pick out the ammo that you want and then get the barrel to match it in the perfect world. And I think that's kind of hopefully where things will head. Air Force definitely has the platforms that are pretty easily and well suited to it, with a lot of power available to pretty much push whatever your heart desires. So, all right. So hopefully this was, you know, taught you guys something or answered some questions or gave you a little bit better of an understanding of this topic. We didn't get too deep on it. We just kind of talked a little bit about what the actual experimental data. So in order to get this data, I fired 10 shot groups of all this, took radar data of 10 shots of every single one of these slugs, calculated the average overall BCs of those 10 shots, excluded the errors that, you know, gave false readings to get truer data, because it's really easy. Like, it could be easily manipulated if you were, if you weren't paying attention. You get errors. I shouldn't say manipulated, but it wouldn't be accurate data necessarily if you just took the information directly off the radar and took its averages in, because sometimes it doesn't track the slug all the way to the target. So out of a 10 shot group, you might have 8 that actually read true all the way to the target. So anyway, that's kind of how I collected the data for all this, and that was the overall trends, firing 10 shots of each weight out of each barrel, and we definitely saw a trend emerge. And since I've gone back and forth with these multiple times since I've had it, that trend is consistent. It's always there. It's not from one day it's there and another day it's gone. This is something that is pretty much predictable. Like, that's the rules of it. Physics don't lie. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this. I think next up we'll be taking a look at the 17 caliber, and we'll do some BC collection with that. I need to get that BCs up on the website, and we'll do some accuracy testing and some ballistics testing and all that fun stuff. All right, guys. So we'll see you next week. Stay tuned, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a good one.